We're designed for togetherness. We've seen the power of it. Just for a moment, it is worth reminding ourselves of the opposite end, then the danger of isolation. What happens when we isolate ourselves? There are some incredible examples of the power of isolation in the whole of the Bible. And let me just give you a couple to help us. First one is Samson, an incredibly talented young man. In the whole of the record of Samson, there is not a single reference to him having a friend. It's quite an amazing thing. Lots of people clinging on, lots of acquaintances, lots of people enjoying the prestige of being around him, not a single friend. It's quite amazing. And our first introduction to Samson, you get these words. He says to his dad, he says, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." Now that sort of sets the tone for the whole of Samson's life. Samson has an amazing beginning. He is clearly called and anointed by God. A supernatural beginning in that his mother couldn't have children and God makes a way for her to have children. So his beginnings are unquestionable. His mandate is unquestionable. And you could argue his authority in God to deliver the nation is unquestionable. And yet Samson never really gets to grips with that issue. In fact, it's not until the end of his life where he says, "Let me die with the Philistines," one of his few prayers in the whole of his story, that Samson starts to do something truly amazing. Every time the Holy Spirit comes on Samson in his story, it's to get him out of trouble. And you just check that out. You know, I remember my Sunday school teacher teaching me about Samson carrying the city gates on his shoulders. But what he didn't tell me, because I checked it out when I got home and I read the story, was that Samson had had sex with a prostitute the previous night. That's why he's there. So he left that wee bit of the story out, which is a bit awkward in Sunday school, that the man of God is having sex with the prostitute before he does this amazing stuff. So that's the sort of problem going on here. And Samson is an isolated young man, brilliantly talented, no question. Gifted, no question. Anointed by God to deliver the nation, no question, but completely isolated. And as a result, he comes undone in a most dramatic and horrific way. You know, we tend to just think about Samson and Delilah, but think about what they did to him. They shave him, they bind him, then they gouge out his eyes, and then they harness him to the grinding wheel like an animal. And he literally, that's what he does. He's now sport for the nation. Imagine this handsome, brilliant, incredibly talented young man reduced to this. Really is quite a horrific picture. Samson has no one to channel him. That was his great weakness. No one in his life to say, "Do you know, you're being a muppet. You need to stop behaving like a baby and you need to start behaving like a man." Yep. No one takes him on. He's no one in his world. No one has the power to say no to him. And I would say to us, now I'm talking as leaders in the context of your life, if there is no one who you give permission to them to say no to you, then you're in trouble. You're in danger. There should be people in your life who actually say to you, "John, will you wise up? Seriously, man. I know you're anointed and you're talented, you've got gifts and you're called by God, but you're behaving like a plonker. So will you get your act together and sort this out?" You need that. You need that. I sat with a guy last week who's one of my bestest friends in the whole world, and he put his foot up my backside. Metaphorically speaking. Didn't literally kick me up the bum, but he did verbally. And he said, "Now your attitude in this issue is out of order." I went to him for love and support. And he said to me, "No, your attitude sucks. You need to sort that out." Now, actually, he was right. Now, I was justifying my attitude because of something that was going on. And he said, "It's not justifiable. You want to be a man of God." And that's what he said to me. "Do you want to be a man of God or not?" And he said this to me. He said, "You're going through something now that is producing greatness in you. And if you don't grasp it, you will lose it." Wow. Yeah. Now, I traveled 50 miles for that advice. Yes. Could have just done this on the phone, couldn't we? No. But there we are. Now, when you're not surrounded by good friends, you've no one to channel you. And here's the problem. When you're anointed and gifted, you sort of start to believe you're invincible. And you can just do stuff. And especially if God's blessed you in the past, He'll bless you again. And actually, no matter how anointed and brilliant you are, you need somebody to say to you, stop that. Stop that. And the right sort of people. I'm not talking about nasty, negative people. I'm talking about friends now. Friends. All right? So it's really important. David, you'll be well aware of this. Many of you, in the context of David's life, an incredible man of God, an absolutely incredible leader. David, even today in Israel, is regarded as one of the premier leaders of that nation. He energized the nation militarily. He energized them in terms of corporate identity in a way that Saul could never dream of. And he set Israel up for a period of financial prosperity and expansion under Solomon that was breathtaking. David was an exceptional leader. Not just a tough warrior, he was an exceptional leader. And it says this about David. David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army in a time or a season of war. There was a certain time in the year to fight because of the weather. And it says, but David remained in Jerusalem. Some of you will know the story that while remaining in Jerusalem, I've had the privilege of going to the old excavation site in Jerusalem where they believe David's palace may have been situated. And quite literally, it sits on the lip of the valley. So there's a valley leading up to Jerusalem, and it sits on the lip, and you can literally look down the valley and see, even today, you can see into the windows of the houses. So David isn't on the roof being some sort of creepy, he's just having a walk. He's catching the air. He's catching the breeze in the hot Jerusalem evening, and he sees a beautiful woman. Now, at that stage, David had 2 wives, and he also had concubines. Now, we don't like this idea, but concubines were essentially women who were there to service and pleasure men. Okay? I know it's in the Bible. The Bible doesn't condone it, but it was there. So it's not like David is sex-starved. Do you know what I mean? He can click his fingers. Here we go. Right? You okay, Jim? Have I touched on something there? You all right? Absolutely. Let's just keep moving, shall we? But he sees this woman. He sees this woman. She's clearly beautiful, and he invites her to his world. The inevitable happens. They have sex. She gets pregnant, and the rest is history. And it's a brutal story. It's a really horrific story. It's one that cost David his personal integrity. And David's throne never recovers from this moment. Now, he still remains the king till he dies, but lots of stuff kicks off because of this fracture in his life. And he invites her in. Now, here's the problem. Even though David is surrounded by servants, he's not surrounded by peers, by friends. Joab wasn't a very nice man, I have to say. Do you know what? I have a little theory that when Jonathan was killed, David lost probably his greatest friend. And David ends up having Joab as his right-hand man, and Joab's a nasty, nasty man. Joab's a brutal character. Sort of man you want in a trench, but not the sort of man you necessarily want in your house. He's a warrior and a fighter, but not a nice person. But Joab's not there. His generals aren't there. His friends aren't there. And David ends up having sex with Bathsheba. Ironically, out of that union, ultimately, Solomon is born. But of course, the offspring of the initial union tragically died. David had no one to challenge him. He had no one to say, David, hold on a minute. What are you doing with Bathsheba? Bathsheba's married to another man. That man is one of your mighty men. Uriah just wasn't a soldier. Uriah is listed as one of the 37 mighty men of David. So he's not just a man, he's one of David's men. He's not only just having sex with a woman, he's having sex with one of his best men. His best men's wives. All right? Do you see that? It's very, very powerful. So David has no one to challenge him. Because of that, he ends up doing something absolutely unbelievable. He can have anything he wants, and he takes the one thing he can't have. Isn't that? Now, as you hear that, you know that's us. That's you, isn't it? It's me. Amazing. That, when my mother hid the chocolate biscuits, I just had to find them. Where are they? Do you know? I know there are chocolate biscuits in the house. My mum doesn't want me to have them. I need to find where they are. And so I would find them and nobble them and try to convince my mother that somebody else got to them. Elijah, amazing anointed man of God. Elijah, fierce individual, terrifying individual in some ways, puts the fear of God into his opponents. And Elijah has this incredible miracle, Mount Carmel, and God sends the fire down and he overcomes the enemies of Baal. And then Jezebel sends out a hit on him and Elijah runs for it. And it says this, listen to these words. It says, when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. That little phrase, he left his servant while he himself. Now from Haifa, or where Mount Carmel is, to Beersheba, it's about 100 miles. So Elijah's not just running, he's running. That's a long way to run, isn't it? And then he reaches a point, and maybe it's because his servant's trying to help him. Maybe it's because his servant's getting at him. What are you doing? You should be, stop. Come with me. You need to get back in the fight, back in the fray. I don't know, but Elijah suddenly dumps him and goes a day's journey into the wilderness, where in fact he asks God to allow him to die. Now, he's not committing suicide, but he's getting close. All right? He's going into the desert in the hope that God will just let him be. And of course, God doesn't let him die. God raises him up again. You can read the story for yourself. Elijah has no one to comfort him. When you're isolated, there's no one to say to you, and by comfort, I don't just mean they're there. By comfort, I mean, get up. Come on. You're not dead yet. You can do this. Come on, let me help you. Put your arm around mine. Come on, let's do this. Yeah, one of my favourite songs. It's been somewhat spoilt a little bit by recent allegations. But when I was a boy growing up, was Rolf Harris' song. My mother had a copy of it, a little single. Two little boys with two little toys. And there's this lovely line where it says, did you think I would leave you? First verse is crying. Second is dying. Do you think I would leave you here when there's room on my horse for two? It's a gorgeous... And one of the reasons that touches us so much is because it represents something we all want to believe in. We want to believe that someone would wait for us. Someone would fight for us. So comfort isn't just, hey, how you doing? Comfort is, come on. Come on, you can do this. Elijah, pull yourself together. Come on, put your arm around mine. Let me help you out of the desert. We can do this together. That can be comfort as well. And when he's on his own, he's no one to rebuke him. So when he says, I want to die, I'm the only one, there's no one to say, no, you're not. What do you want to die for? You won a great victory. Come on, man. Stand up. Do it. You can do it. But there's no one there to challenge him. And then, lastly, here's a New Testament example. A young man called Diotrephes. And it says this of Diotrephes in the context of John's letter. But Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with us. It's just tucked away there. It's a wee phrase in 3 John. He will have nothing to do with us. In other words, Diotrephes isolates himself from the community, has no connection there. In other words, he has no one to correct him. And what happens to Diotrephes is that he goes off the rails theologically. He ends up getting a bit power mad, power hungry. And John almost has to threaten that when I come, I'll sort this thing out. I'll sort him out. Now, when you start isolating yourself from good friends, you start to believe stuff. They can be a bit weird. Yeah? In my experience, the people who've come out with the weird stuff are people who've no strong friends around them to sort of say, that's weird. Where did you get that from? Are you eating too much cheese on a Saturday night? What's wrong with you that you would be thinking that? Where's that in the Bible? And of course, often when people get challenged like that, what they do is they back off the people who will say, where's that in the Bible? Or, why are you doing that? Or, what's going on? No one to correct them. No one to help them get this thing right and think about it. And I remember being in Bible college, and we had a guy called Paul Mercy teach us the Gospel of John, although I can't remember much about John, but his stories were amazing. And he said this, I never forgot this, he said this once in his lecture, he said, isolation is either the forerunner to disaster or a sign of disaster. So in other words, when you isolate yourself, you're about to fall off the cliff because you're on your own. Or when you isolate yourself, you've already done something a bit edgy. So you're trying to pull away from the people who will go, what's going on? Why have you done that? There's real power in isolation. That's why the devil tries to move in isolation. So isn't it interesting that the devil comes to Jesus in the first recorded temptation when Jesus is alone? See that? I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's there. There's a big debate in Genesis. Was Eve alone or not? And the Hebrew's not conclusive. It suggests that Adam was with her, but some have argued that with her in the sense that he's there, but not engaging in the moment. So was he right beside her when the serpent was speaking, or was he somewhere there? It's not clear. So, but it's interesting. The serpent goes after her, and what she does is she fights him alone. Now, what might have been interesting was if she had a call for Adam and said, Adam, I'm getting some earache from the serpent. Can you come and sort this out? Can you help me? What's going on here? Now, if she had a call for help, maybe the story would have been different, maybe not. But the thing is, she fights the serpent alone. And when you're alone, you're a bit more vulnerable to the weird and the wonderful, shall I say. Is that okay? That makes sense? So, protected together. In the context of the church, of course, we're not just talking about building friendships of people with people of the same sex, but often in the context of the church, as is reflected in this room, we're dealing with people of the opposite sex. And the Christian church should be able to model friendships and relationships that are healthy and whole and beautiful and filled with integrity with members of the opposite sex. All right? We should be able to model that. Now, the Christian church makes us strangely vulnerable to areas of sexuality because of often the positive nature of our communities. So because we're often saying to people, you're doing great, you're doing well, well done, encourage them, support them, uplift them, that often actually can make people more susceptible to areas of temptation and sin than we want to truly admit. And we have to be careful with all of that in the context of our world. But even though there are some challenges, we mustn't shy away from modeling to the world that we can work together as men and women in building strong friendships. There is something very powerful for a man to be able to have a healthy relationship with women, because he learns things about himself and he learns things about another view of the world, which actually makes him a better man. If men only hang with men, they get a very often one-sided view of the world, and also I don't think it's healthy for the development of our emotional intelligence. We actually need that. That's why the biblical pattern of raising children, ideally, is a man and a woman, because you get a cohesive perspective of emotional development and worldview for that child. They're not just seeing a male view of the world, they're not just seeing a female view of the world, they're seeing a holistic view. So, actually, for me as a man, it's a good thing that I build healthy, strong relationships with members of the opposite sex. And I would say vice versa for women. It will mean different things, but that's a good thing for us to think about. But of course, we must not ignore the vulnerabilities. We must not ignore the issues that we must pay attention to things that keep those contexts pure. The Bible says this, above all else, above everything else you do, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Now, let me just say this to you. This is a powerful word, because what it points to is the idea of both source and boundary. Your heart, your inner life, is the source of all things. Okay? It's the health of your heart or the unhealthiness of your heart affects everything in your world. So if your heart is healthy, everything's healthy. If your heart is sick, everything's sick. In that it's contaminated or affected by the condition of your heart. So, in a sexual context, for example, or in building relationships with members of the opposite sex, if your heart is unhealthy in that area, then every relationship becomes tainted and vulnerable. If your heart is healthy, then actually relationships are safe, provided we protect ourselves. Yeah? Now, the problem with the heart is it's unseen. So, this is where friendships, honesty, and personal integrity are key. Because things can get in your heart that you're convinced are not there, but you know are there. And if we don't face up to what's there, then the things in our hearts can take us to places we don't want to go. Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitfully wicked above all else. In other words, it's a weird concept. Your heart can convince you you're right when you're wrong. Literally, your own heart can deceive itself, can deceive you. That's a bit weird. So you have an argument with yourself and lose. It's a weird idea. But that's that. And how many times have we met someone who has literally convinced themselves that wrong is right? Have you met them? Maybe you've done it yourself. I certainly have. And I've certainly met people like that who have convinced themselves that wrong is right. So that's why the heart needs to be guarded. And you have a responsibility to guard your heart. But this is again where good friendships come in. Great friendships add a layer of protection to your heart. So if things start to emerge out of us, because everything inside of us will eventually come out, no matter how hard we try to disguise it, it will eventually come out, then good friends can start to pick that up and see that in our world. Yes? Okay. If your heart is pure, your relationships will be safe. And that's really what we've got to think about. That's the baseline for us. If your heart is pure, your relationships are safe. And so we want to keep our hearts open to God. But there are some practical things. Let me give you some practical guidance, things that I personally try to live by. So what I'm about to show you on the screen isn't from a book. It's just stuff that I would personally try to live by. And there will be a measure of vulnerability in this that I hope you will be sensitive with. And obviously, I'll be careful because it's recorded. First of all, it's just recognizing what temptation is. Temptation in itself is not sin. The challenge with temptation is what James talks about. He says that temptation is when opportunity and desire get together. That's where temptation really kicks in. So James says none of us are being tempted by God to do evil, but we're led away by our own desires. All right? Now, part of guarding your heart is to be honest with your desire. When you pretend it's not there, that's when you're in trouble. Be honest. Now, I don't mean put it on Twitter, be honest. But I mean, be honest with yourself at the very least, if that's possible. And if you have strong personal relationships, find a level of honesty within that. That's there. I very, very rarely travel on my own. Very, very rarely, especially any significant traveling. If fact, young Johnny Hodges was to be here tonight, but Pastor Dave had an emergency funeral to do, and so Johnny's gone with him to support a very difficult context there and help him serve there today, or he would have been here. But any major trip, overseas trip, stuff like that, I very, very rarely travel on my own because I sort of know what I'm vulnerable to. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I'm a bad person. I don't think I am. But I know what my heart is capable of. All right? Now, when you start playing games with your heart, that's when you're in trouble. And you start, no, I'm fine. If it's cool, I'm easy. It's okay. Everything. Actually, no. I understand that if the edge of my cliff is there, I have to build fences way back here to the edge of that cliff. If I get too close to that cliff, I jeopardize too many things. And it's there. So, desire. There are desires within me as a man that I must protect. They're natural desires and they're normal desires. But if they're allowed to go unchecked, natural becomes dangerous. Takes me to places I don't want to go. A bit like David in his palace. His desire, sexual desire, is perfectly normal and healthy. His desire for that woman was not. And there was no one, literally, to stop him. So when opportunity meets desire, that's where you get temptation. And if we give in to that temptation, that's what leads to sin. And in fact, James uses, please forgive me, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but he sort of uses a sexual imagery. He talks about, if you like, desire, an opportunity coming together, literally, in intercourse and producing the baby of sin, conceiving sin, and sin produces death. So there's this image that we've literally got to try and stop that happening, put barriers in the way of those things. That's where me and you have got to be intentional and deliberate about stuff in our lives, private and public, and how we behave. So don't put yourself, let me just say before I move on to time, don't put yourself into unnecessary vulnerability. Right? Now, if I can be really honest with you, I literally have things, walls around my life that I build. So, for example, when Dawn goes to bed, I tend to go to bed with her. I try not to stay up late on my own. All right? Men in the room may understand what I'm talking about. I put myself in levels of emotional vulnerability that's not good for me. So I literally, that's a wall that I've built in my life. When we travel together, and sometimes Joe will know, if you travel in certain parts of the world, you can turn on a television and in the day, and you're not getting daytime television. You're getting something a little more interesting, shall we say, that draws your attention. So when I travel anywhere in the world, we have a rule, for example, in the hotel room, that we don't turn the television on without the other person being in the room. Right? So, why, John, are you some sort of like pervert or something? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. But I am a man who is vulnerable, and if I don't take those vulnerabilities seriously, they will end up hurting everybody I love. All right? So I don't want to fall. I don't want to be known as the guy who ran off with or had sex with. I don't. So I have to protect myself and protect those I love. Is that okay? I'm just being a bit vulnerable. Some of that may be a bit uncomfortable for you and too much. That's okay. We're leaders in the room. It's important. So, time. Who are you spending time with? So some questions we ask around time. How long are you spending with people and where? So, working in the church, you are going to work with members of the opposite sex. The little thing you've just got to watch is, are you spending disproportionate amounts of time with one person? All right? Just watch that. And watch where you are. So I would advise you, try where possible, not to be on your own, especially with someone you like. And I mean like in the clean sense. They're good friends. You get on well with them. Try not to be on your own for too long when you're on your own in an isolated context with a member of the opposite sex, especially if you get on well with them and you like them. Because that just, can make life a wee bit more difficult. So be careful. If you're spending disproportionate amounts of time with a particular member of the opposite sex, then someone should be flagging that. Okay? And we have to just watch that with our teams. So some of you in your team, maybe you're working with someone in planning, so you're doing a lot of work together planning. That's absolutely fine. If you're having to do that, make sure you're doing it in a public space. So invite the person to your home where your family's there and sit at your dining room table and work together. Oh no, well we meet in the coffee shop. No, don't think so. Meet in a public space. Be in a place where you are accountable. Let people know where you're going. Let people know who you're with. Once you start keeping secrets, that's the heart playing games with you. Now, you'll convince yourself you're not doing it, but seriously, honestly. I've been around long enough, I've heard every conceivable type of story where people have played games to try and convince themselves. So don't do it. Keep yourself in the light. Keep it open. Keep it public. If you're married, tell your spouse where you're going and who you're with and why. And why you're spending that amount of time with that person. And if you have to spend a lot of time with them, protect yourself by spending it in the sorts of places that will make it difficult for anything not very nice to happen. Is that okay? Yeah. All right, can I keep going? Yeah. Okay. Talk. People generally, when it comes to members of the opposite sex, we generally don't just jump into bed with people. You don't move from hello to having sex. I mean, ordinarily, I'm sure it happens somewhere, but ordinarily that doesn't happen. There's a whole process in between that takes people into sin. And one of the issues is around how we converse with people, how we talk to people, what we do with people. And there's some things we've got to think about. What are we talking about and how? Now, I get very nervous. Can I speak as a man? I get very nervous as men who only go to women for advice on certain stuff. I just seriously, my bells ring. I think, well, why aren't you coming to me? I'm a bloke. I understand bloke stuff. I've been a bloke 47 years. Come on. You want to try and yank my chain on this? Come on, talk to me about bloke stuff. What's going on? No, she understands me. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, I get you. Now, it may be true she understands you, but what you're doing is you're playing a game. You're convincing yourself that actually that feeling you're feeling is nothing other than brother and sisterly love, when actually what it is probably a little bit, something's opening up. See, when you share your innermost secrets and innermost desires in terms of life in the universe with people, something opens up inside you. And that's why even ministers and pastors have to be careful in a counselling situation. When someone becomes vulnerable, there's something potentially, forgive me for this, forgive me. There is something potentially very arousing in that context. That's why you have to protect yourself from those things. So if a man is always going to a certain woman or women for solace, it's a wee bit of a sign. Get him into a men's connect group. Let's go and do manly things together. Come on, let's talk about your problems. Yeah? You there? And if a woman is always going to another man other than her husband if she's married, now I know people can do that because they're not getting emotional support at home. I understand all of that, but that's what makes us vulnerable. So then, got to help them. Look, if you need some help, let's steer you away from this and into this. Come on, and even for you, some of you working in a support ministry and pastoral ministry, you are vulnerable because you're there to help people. You're there to serve people. And again, we just need to keep our hearts in the light. If you get nervous, say something to somebody that you trust. If you're nervous, Pastor, can I speak to you privately? I just need to let you know I'm a bit nervous about this. I'm seeing something, I don't know what I'm seeing. And do you know, can I just say this? When you're a godly spiritual person, sometimes you feel something in your gut, intuitively, about something. And many, many times, no, not always, please, it's not an exact science, but many times it's actually quite accurate. You pick something up. You pick a vibe up. And when Dawn says something to me, she says, you just need to watch that situation. Well, why? Just trust me. You need to watch that. Then, as a man, I've learned to say, okay. Or if I'm picking something, that will often open up to her and say, what do you think about this? I'm feeling something about that. What's going on there? And if you've got that type of relationship, that's helpful. If you don't have that, it's trying to find healthy peer friends who can help you with that stuff. It's not always easy, but don't sit in isolation. Bring it into the light. Does that make sense? Okay, here we go. We'll keep going. Touch. Can I just, again, we don't want to get uptight about all of this. We're in a Christian community where we should be able to shake hands, even embrace, even kiss one another in a way that's pure. All right? But, again, let's be sensitive as to why you're touching someone, where you're touching them. I don't mean physically on their body, I mean the context of the place where you're touching them and how you're touching them. In a Christian community where we're often huggy sort of the people, I do get nervous about people who hug. Well, let me put it again as a man. I get nervous about men who hug very shapely women. And you can't get we used to say in Belfast, you can't get a bus ticket between them. All right? Now, listen, I know that probably doesn't happen in your church, but I don't like that. And I think we need to watch that. Now, we have a culture in our team, when we do morning devotions, after morning devotions, we pray for one another, and then we all go around the room, and there's like a greeting with a kiss or a hug, and that's absolutely fine. But, you know, even there, you have to watch that actually, hold on, that's not nice, that's a bit over familiar. All right? So please, it's how we touch, it's what we do, it's being overly familiar, it's being indiscreet, and they're all wee things, and they're just little indicators. Now, when you spot that in others, you just got to, this is where friends come in, you go, hey, do you know what? And don't do it in front of everybody, privately, do you know what? I just felt that's just a wee bit inappropriate. Just need to stop. Yeah, but if I say that to them, they'll leave the church. Well, do you know what I would say? If they leave the church over something like that, it's probably an indication that they're not quite wired into where you're going. So, actually, if somebody said to me, John, do you know, I just thought you're a bit over familiar with that girl, then actually I've got to take that seriously, because I'm thinking, well, if he thinks that, a dozen other people might think that, and that hurts me as a pastor. So we've got to listen to the people around us. Just be careful about that. Again, please, don't wrap yourself in cotton wool and walk out of the room tonight and go, get away. Don't touch me, get away. Please, let's not go over the top weird, but just be sensitive and aware. And remember, in a spiritual, emotional, charismatic context, we're also a little bit vulnerable. And we just got to be careful of those vulnerabilities. Truth. What do I mean by that as we draw this to a close? Well, who in your life do you give permission to tell you the truth? I mean, seriously, who can do that? Say, well, my husband does that, my wife does that. That's brilliant, and that's the first line of defense. And we need to then make sure it's there. If you're not in a relationship with a spouse, or maybe your husband or your wife's not a Christian, that can be a bit of an awkward conversation. Who in your world would you say, do you know, I'm having a struggle with this? I really am. And I need some help. There's a guy who was part of the Rotherham Church, still up there, John Benny, one of my best friends in the whole world. I miss him so much. And John used to travel with me everywhere. And John sort of really got to know me. He got inside my brain. And he knew when I was under pressure with stuff, or he knew when, there was something even spiritual or an attack happening. And so often, John would just spot stuff and step in and help me and support me. And can I just say, there were moments when I would say to John, John, just pray for me right now, because I'm feeling some vulnerability around maybe a sexual issue. I need you to pray for me. So you can't, John, you're his pastor. You can't tell him that. Well, he's not just a member of the flock. He's my mate. He's my friend. He's an armor bearer. Now, I wouldn't put that on Twitter. Today I had sexual temptation. I mean, I'm not going to tell the whole world that, but I needed a friend who was bearing my shield to say, you know, I need you to help me. I need you to support me. And he would be the sort of person who would have permission to say, John, you need to watch that, or, yeah. I mean, John would travel with me, and we had this agreement about watching the TV. If I was watching the TV and he wasn't in the room, he'd come in and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm watching TV. No, we had an agreement. You got someone like that in your world? Because we need that. We do. We need that. They're the people that will save our lives. And then tough. Some of this is tough. Some of it requires tough talk. Some of it requires tough love. And here's the danger with tough. People go, how dare you talk to me like that? I'm off. Now, again, when it's a complete stranger, we have to be careful. When it's friends, the Bible says that the wounds of a friend are better in some ways than even the caress of a brother. It's that sense of, actually, the wounds of a friend can save your life. And it's having the sort of toughness in your soul and in your world that allows that to be brought to a place of vulnerability. Now, listen, I know for most of us, this is not a constant issue. It's may not even for some of us be an occasional issue. But there are people in the room, and it's something you have to really make sure we're protecting ourselves over and watching over. And not just with members of the opposite sex, but even with the digital world, with the private world, with the TV world, with the internet world. We've got to be very, very careful and build walls into our lives that help us. What? And the toughness is, what do we need to do to protect ourselves? It'll never happen to me. It's funny, people who say that, generally it happens to them. But it's saying, this could happen to me. Joe and Linda and I were in Bible college together, and we had very, very outstanding people who had to leave Bible college because they did stuff that they shouldn't have done. And their hearts were broken afterwards, and we often had to sit with them as they were packing up their stuff and leaving their dreams behind. It's a brutal moment. And actually, when you say it can never happen to me, we're being spongy and soft. We've got to toughen up, and we've got to say, this could happen to me. So how do I protect myself on my computer? How do I protect myself with my iPhone? Don't even have to go to a sex shop now. Got it all here if I want it. How do I protect myself with the wonderful relationships I have with members of the opposite sex that are good people, and I want those relationships to stay pure? How do I protect myself from my own desires? And actually, it's building walls, practical walls, spiritual walls, friendship walls, that actually protect us and keep us whole. So don't run alone, run together. And the chances are, if you run together, you'll run longer and survive longer. Is that okay? Bless you. Here endeth the lesson. God bless you. Thank you.